2003, and this is the beginning of an interview with Mr. George Kennedy at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Lynn Lowitz, and I will be the interviewer. Mr. Kennedy, could you tell us a little bit about your early years?
I think you also want to say also present.
Thank you. Also present is his son, George Kennedy Jr. Thank you.
I was born in Jacksonville, Florida in 1921, one of 5 children. I was the middle one, and we lived in Avondale, and I graduated from Robert E. Lee High School. Then I went to Georgia Military College in Millersville, where I had family connections. My mother's folks were from there. And then I went to the University of Florida for a year, and the war had started in the meantime, and I got accepted as a Navy flying cadet, and was sent first to where you want to get in the military part. Okay, I was first sent to Athens pre-flight school. They didn't have any planes for us to fly right away, so they sent us over to these pre-flight school to, quote, get us in shape and learn something about the Navy and ground school work like navigation and weather predicting, etc. I was there 3 or 4 months. It was very strenuous for me because it's all half a day classrooms and a half a day athletics, and not being an athlete, I was a spectator sport. I was on the weak squad, and it wasn't all that much fun for me. But however, I did know how to swim, having been raised in Florida, and some of the big football players that were there couldn't throw them in the water, they almost drowned. Anyway, from there I went to Anacostia, which is a naval training field, basic training at outside of Washington. And there we learned how to fly steerments. Let me go back to something that was important in my case, because I already knew how to fly before I got in the Navy. Franklin Roosevelt, in anticipation of us getting in the war at some point, and realizing we were behind the Nazi powers and so forth, decided to stir up some interest in flying, since he and many others felt that was where the future, most of it was going to be fought in the air. Anyway, he started and offered to college students what they call civilian pilot training program, and I was given flight lessons at Georgia Military College and learned how to fly there in a single engine, a small airplane. So I did at least know how to fly. We were going back to Anacostia. I was first to, I may have been the last to get out of pre-flight school, but I was the first to fly in my class because I had had some previous flight training. From there, I was lucky to go to Pensacola, which is a cradle of aviation and steeped in military and naval history. And there, got into secondary training, and then decided I wanted to be a multiple engine pilot rather than a fighter pilot, not being, I guess, the aggressive type or wanting to have anybody shoot at me. I chose twin engines and got in, was taken in training in PBY, which is a patrol plane, seaplane. And after graduation, pure luck had it, they needed some instructors, and I was on the table, so I got assigned for a year of instructing in PBY seaplanes. Is that enough? You want me to keep on?
Keep on.
Well, I'll be out. I'll be over soon. I'll have to say in the meantime, I did get married. A girl I had met at Athens. She was from St. Petersburg, and realized I probably would not have had I not gotten this training and being in the States for a while. I doubt the first place she would have had me, and it probably would not have been advisable to get married and go overseas right away, which a lot of guys had to do. I won this as my wife, being social-minded, planned a big wedding in St. Petersburg and sent out invitations, etc. And I was to come down, and when I applied for my leave for the weekend or a week, I was called into the exec office, and he said, well, you just got your wings a few months ago, and you already had your vacation. We're not going to let you go anywhere. And I said, well, this is going to be bad news, because the girls are not going to like that, which they didn't. And my mother-in-law was supposed to have said, you tell that commander, whatever he is, that I said that he's going to be in St. Petersburg the night of the wedding. And he consented then and said, maybe it will be good for public relations. And which it was, a big wedding and all that jazz.
Were you in Pensacola the entire time that you were in the service?
No.
What years were you in Pensacola?
Well, I guess it took me a year total to get my wings. I was a trainee down there probably 3 or 4 months, because I had pre-flight and then basic training. And then with this assignment, I was stationed in Pensacola a year.
Do you remember what year that was?
I went overseas in 44, 45. I don't remember dates. I'm not very good at that.
Where did you go when you went overseas?
We first went to California, and my wife insisted on seeing me off, quote, and we borrowed enough gas rationing with both families to drive out there on retread tires. We thought we'd never get there, but we did. And she had to come back on a plane and was put off 3 times to make way for servicemen. You weren't supposed to be flying in those days. Another little item, when we went out there, we could not stay, nor could she stay just before I left for more than 2 nights in any tourist courts, they call them the motels. And that was a limit. Anybody could stay at any public hotel, because they would want everybody and his brother coming to California to see them off, which we did, which she did. Anyway, went over on a baby carrier as a passenger, and went to Guam, where I was stationed, which was my main base for the year that I was overseas.
Tell me a little bit about your experience on Guam.
Well, we primarily were to transport for Marines, personnel, equipment, and supplies to the forward islands. The war was winding down, and we were not all that busy, but we were standing by. We had a thing going with the Navy NATS, they call it Naval Air Transport. They were much bigger than we were, the Marine transport, so they got most of the jobs, but Well, I flew, I guess, into every island in the Pacific, and it was very interesting, the different ones, and some of them fairly soon after they were taken. I went to Iwo Jima just a few weeks after it was secured. I ran into a buddy from high school, and he was a captain in the infantry Marines and wanted to know if I wanted to go up the mountains. And there was a few Japs still up there at night and hunt them, and I declined the invitation. One other time I went to Okinawa, and they were still fighting on the end of the island. And that was one time I did sleep in a trench because prior to that, one of our planes, or one of the transport planes, was there and spent the night, and the fellow slept in the plane, the pilot and the crew. And that just happened that the Japs had captured one of our transport planes and came in to the airfield with the intent of blowing it up, which they succeeded, and including whatever aircraft were on the ground. So they wouldn't let us sleep in the planes. And they didn't want that to happen again.
When you were flying your transport missions, did you have one crew that always flew together?
No, the crews were interchangeable, as pilots were.
Who do you remember from those missions flying with you?
Well, of course, I would remember a movie star, Tyrone Powell, had gotten his wings, and by the way, he did it the hard way, and not like somebody like Robert Taylor, who was a pilot and got his wings right, but Tyrone Powell went through basic training at Paris Island and was well liked. He was not in my squadron, but I ran into him several times. And he got to go into China when the war was over, and some of the planes were going over there, and he got to go because of who he was, but he was well liked. Excuse me.
Do you have any particular individual memories of missions that you flew?
Well, those were important ones. I went to Peleliu, which was not well known at the time. Excuse me. Let's call a halt.
Okay, we'll get started again.
You ready, Adam?
No, I'm not ready yet.
Sorry. Getting into some bad weather and having to take controls from the...
First pilot.
Yeah.
That's one I'll never forget. We had been home, had arrived after flying back, I think it's 3,000 miles, and we had to fly from, I forget, somewhere in San Diego or LA or El Centro, one of the fields, the airplane, and we got into a storm, what they later learned was a occluded front, which is when two fronts run together, really bad weather. And we were in between these two high mountains there near the shore of California, and the storm got worse, and our lights went out, and we all of a sudden discovered we were lost. We had not been on instruments, or at least we couldn't determine where we were, and in that short a distance, we could have run into one of the mountains real quick. So it was scary for a while. I'm sure it wasn't but a few minutes, but it seemed like an hour. And I remember one of the crew saying, I told them if they wanted to, they could jump. We were a pretty bad spot. And one of them said, no, Lieutenant, we'll stay with y'all, with you. And fortunately, I did see a break for a while there in flying. One or the other has it in your twin engine, and both of us, for a while there, both of us were wrestling with the wheel. But anyway, I saw a bright spot in sky below me and jerked it away from him, and we went down and landed at Baker's Field. I'll never forget that. So a little scary to be toward the end.
What was the morale like among the other men?
Great. The war was in some sense, as people have called it, a good war, if there is such a thing, because simply we were all in it. Everybody was in it. There wasn't any attempt to make it half war like some of the others have been since. And as a result, everybody was involved, including the civilians, and there was morale was very high, and spirit and camaraderie and whatever you call it was very high, and it was a real privilege and an honor to serve. And the uniform was highly respected, and officers got special treatment, and I was lucky in that sense. And it's an experience I'll never forget because, number one, I was young, and you were adventuresome, and life was before you, and you had great dreams and expectations, and everybody was friendly, and everybody was respectful of each other, and took time to be friendly, and it was a great experience.
Did you have much contact with the people who lived on Guam, the natives?
A few times we went to one of their religious ceremonies. I forget what it was, but the main one, I guess, was the guy that cut our hair. And I forget what we called them. But anyway, Guam of most of the islands, of course not Hawaii, but most of the islands spoke English, and they were more educated than the others because the Navy for years had been in there, and a lot of them had served as cooks and so forth in the Navy. So it was more civilized than most of the other islands. One of the islands I found most interesting was a place called Ulysses, which had not received a lot of publicity, but it was a natural base for the Navy operations and closer to the front. And that's where Halsey kept his fleet, and they would move them in and out, but use the same airplanes, and the Japs thought we had bigger force than we did because of that reason. The only landing strip there was another reason I remember, because it was very short. I don't remember figures, but I remember we took off, we gave it all it had, and with the brakes, and then let loose and hope we got in the air before we got to the end of the little strip.
What were your quarters like?
Well, they're called Follies, which came with the squadron down before I joined it, and was from French Island, I'm sure. It was it had a wood floor and sides up about waist high, and then a tent. And the one we took over, we were told that by the guys that were going home that the plumbing, which was a sink, was going to cost us $350, which we thought was ridiculous, but we were glad to pay it, to have in-house plumbing. Of course, we had that wasn't true of all of our needs, and we had an outhouse, which we call, well, you know, one of those.
How many people did it?
We had officers' quarters, officers' mess, and the bar was down at one end. Liquor was rationed. We got about a fifth of a month, as I remember, and it's interesting that the CBs, the contractors that are in the service, they got wind of this ration coming in before we did. They were down trying to buy it from us. It's worth $50 a bottle, and we didn't sell it much for that. They wanted to sell us Japanese samurai swords, but we found out they were Jeep springs later. But we had powdered eggs, and the food was pretty good. But the Navy, and of course, I wasn't in the ground Marines, and I don't want to take any credit away from them. They were really a different breed of cats.
How did people entertain themselves when you weren't on a mission?
The time was biggest bore, and that was one of the worst parts of it. Was a year felt like 5 years, and you know, especially when having anything to do. I read a lot of what I could get my hands on, and had movies every night. Some of them I'd seen 2 or 3 times, but it seemed like an awful long time.
How many people were there?
Some of them played cards. I was not a gambler. My squadron, I guess a couple hundred.
And how did you stay in touch with your family?
Just writing. I wrote my wife back every night, and my father every month, or every couple of weeks. And we had V-mail, and it was supposed to be censored, and so they wouldn't know where we were, the enemy. And that was one of our jobs we detested. We had to censor the enlisted men's mail, and it's kind of pitiful to hear some of their tales. And they would thank them for sending some letters or things with perfume in them.
What were your instructions on censoring the mail?
Well, to scratch out anything that might give information, maybe where we were, where the mail was coming from. We were very lenient. I didn't read half of them. By the time I got there, I thought it was pretty ridiculous. I suppose had I been on the front lines, it would have been important to talk about it or write about it, but where I was, I didn't think it was that important. We did, another awful experience was a monsoon or hurricane, typhoon. We happened to be in Iwo Jima. This is when I was going from Guam. I didn't fly from Guam to Japan. We went up there after the war was over. We had no idea, no one did, how we were going to be treated. And MacArthur did a good job of arranging for us to go there peacefully, because, well, I'll mention atomic bomb later, but I went from Guam to Japan on a Liberty ship. Some of us went up with some of the equipment instead of flying, and this Liberty ship was in the little harbor there at Iwo Jima, and a typhoon came up, and of course you don't want any ships near land where a typhoon could blow you into the shore. So what few ships there took to sea, and I've never since I want to experience the waves that we went, and all the dishes and everything. We went, some of the old-time seamen, merchant marines that were on that ship said they'd never been anything like it, and the Navy lost 2 or 3 ships with a lot of mail aboard, which got a lot of bad publicity. Speaking of that, those who think that we should never drop the atomic bomb, I, for one, am glad we did. The Japanese were not about to give up, as people say. Just look at the kamikazes at Okinawa at the end, and they were blind when it came to loyalty, and they would have fought, and it would have cost Americans, some estimates, above 100,000 people, soldiers, to take those islands. And I'm glad we used it, and we were prepared to help in the invasion. I understand the plans were, and it had included us, and for no other reason than my own personal reason, I'm glad we did. But it could have been an awful massacre to taking those islands. They were not going to give up anytime soon as some people guessed.
Were you over there when they dropped the bomb?
Yes. We didn't know any more about it than anybody else, except that it was a massive thing and something would come from it, something big. I remember Roosevelt's death was brought more attention. Of course, we knew that right away. He was a president all my grown life, and he was quite a blow. He was worshipped by most of the Americans at the time. There were those who hated that man, but he was very popular.
Were the folks in the military with you concerned when he died?
Yes, we were. Well, I suppose it's hard to replace a commander, the president, is the only one you knew in my case. And Harry Truman was unheard of, except he had headed up a investigation, war profiteering, and done a good job. But the contrast of his background and his manner and his speeches was quite a blow. But we soon learned, and since, of course, learned that he made a good president. And I liked him from the beginning after the blow came.
Did you get any leave while you were overseas?
No. The year wasn't considered in too long, and also I was not in combat. Had I been in combat, I'm sure I probably would have. Although I think some of them did not. They were using young people like they were in Europe. It lasted longer than anybody expected, and there were a lot more casualties and deaths than people expected. There was in many ways a tragedy, as any war is, and there's no getting around how bad it is. And I don't mean to glamorize it or glorify it in any way, but it seems like to me that since the beginning of time they've had them, and there are times when you have to use force.
What do you think was the most dangerous thing that you were involved with?
That I was involved in? Not really. I was lucky again. I guess training was, we lost some guys in training, and in my case, there was very little risk involved.
How did you lose them in training?
Just accidents, flying accidents on the water. Pensacola was great duty, though. The Navy had very fine facilities and officers' quarters, and drinks at the bar were 50 cents, and we flew half a day and played golf the other half. It was good duty.
Do you remember the day that your service ended overseas?
Overseas? Mm-hmm. No, I wasn't overseas. We flew some of the planes back, and I wish I'd loaded it up with some things. I did get two rifle, what do you call it? What I give you? The
M1 carbine.
Yeah, carbines. And I was afraid when I got back to the States and had heard that every planes would be inspected for any contraband or whatever. But I saw a concert hut that was full of nothing but carbines, just thousands of them. It was probably just rotted away, like the airplanes were.
When you returned to the States, what happened then?
We went to Japan first.
Well, yeah, I touched brief when it was over, and they found out that everybody was going to shoot us. They sent our squadron up just in case, or a lot of us. And I was there a couple of weeks and went ashore on this Liberty ship, went ashore as much as I could. And found it to be very interesting. We Americans knew very little about Japan. There was one book on the ship that we all read, and it's a very mountainous country, and food is very scarce, flat land to grow anything. So I hadn't got any meat and no fields for cows. And went to one of the big resorts there at the base of Mount Fujiyama, and pretty country, but I still don't trust them.
How were you treated by the Japanese when you were there?
Very, very nice and bowing, and that's what I say. And you can't, but you couldn't trust them. Since this in recent months, some of the atrocities that they pulled on some of the pilots. This new book out, it's called Flyboys. Goes into the ones that were captured, the men that were captured with President Bush. He was lucky and was picked up by a submarine, but the rest of them were sent to one of those islands and beheaded and tortured. I have not read it. I plan to.
Did you leave the service when you returned to the States, or were you still in the service?
No, I got out, couldn't wait. I was not the type. It takes a certain personality to be a career military. You know, your life is not your own, and there's a big class distinction, which it has to be, and there's no room for discussion like business, where you have a voice if you have anything to say. It's a different world. At any rate, I got out. I think I was in the reserve for several years and was afraid of being called up for Korea, but I wasn't, fortunately.
What did you do after you left the service?
I went back to school, and the government was very lenient again with the GI Bill, and they afforded millions of us education.
Where did you go?
The University of Florida.
And
did not graduate. Went to work instead.
what kind of work have you done in your life?
Most of real estate. I've done a little bit of everything. Praising primarily. I was a member of the Appraisal Institute, and with Adams Cates, which I don't know the new lips coming out of one of them, for 5 years in leasing. Then I was with a public real estate company that managed some 1,000 apartments, and that was my management. Then I went with the bank for 15 years, SunTrust, trust company of Georgia is now SunTrust, head of the trust real estate division and trust department.
How did you end up in Atlanta?
When I first got out, I went to work for my father-in-law, who was a mass appraisal business. He appraised for tax purposes, and we got the big job in Atlanta, and I came up here and liked it and wanted to stay.
Do you mind giving us your wife's name?
Ma'am?
Your wife's name?
Louise Honeycutt was my wife's first wife.
Okay.
And then she died of cancer at age 58.
She was younger than that.
Oh, was she? And I had one marriage that didn't work in between, but now I'm happily married to a local girl.
Do you have any children other than George Jr.?
I had a daughter. She was 58.
Now, Courtney was 48.
48.
And Mother was 52.
Okay.
Yeah. Courtney never even made it 50.
She had cancer too and died.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
She was never married. George Jr. has two two grown sons doing real well.
When you were in the reserves, was that here in Atlanta?
In the military reserve, no, they just carried me in the reserves for a few years after World War II. And I was never called up, and eventually it just dropped. Because I did not participate. Some of the guys went out and stayed in reserves, and I didn't. I was traveling at the time, and I didn't want to spend weekends sitting out in an airfield.
Have you maintained any friendships or connections with folks you served with in the military?
Very few. We all thought we would be, as you do when you're closely lived close. We thought we'd all see each other, but we haven't. I have heard from one of my roommates who stayed in the reserves, and he ended up a major, and we corresponded a couple letters, but that was about it. Your interests change and your life changes after something like that, and I haven't seen, I don't get any of them. Because, well, we like to talk about it though, and at the drop of a hat we'll talk about it. Because it makes us feel young again.
Did you join any of the veterans organizations?
Not really, no.
Okay. And so you haven't attended any reunions or?
No.
Anything else you'd like to add?
I think I've touched on them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy, let me just return briefly. Tell us a little bit about the planes that you actually flew and how big the crews were and that kind of information, and just some of the technical aspects of flying.
I'm not technically minded, but I'll give you what, from the pilot standpoint. The first plane I flew was the one that, am I on the camera still?
Yes, sir.
First plane was that civilian pilot program at Georgia Military College, and that was what we call a Veronica Chief. It looked like a tailorcraft, which I think everybody's familiar with. And you took 8 hours, and you soloed, and we took a nav hop from Milledgeville to Savannah and back. The big deal. Mostly followed the railroad or highways. Then
This was a single, just one person in this?
so two.
One for the instructor?
Yeah. Then basic training was Stearman, which is a famous all-Army as well as Navy and Marine pilots trained in Stearman's, bi-wing and for acrobatics, and it was a great trainer, and everybody, all military flyers have great memories of the Stearman. We call it, the Navy called it the Yellow Peril. They were all painted yellow. That was to be easily recognized because they knew there were students in them. And
So like
I was not instrument minded, and that's another reason I always had a co-pilot. But that was the second one. And I got flown. I was
up in one of those a couple of years ago.
Yeah, there's one out there at the air station.
what was that like?
In my instrument training, the late trainer in Pensacola, even when I was a cadet, they put you there and you're supposed to fly from New York, from Atlanta, or Pensacola, New York, or something. And this little trainer, and then they put the wind on you, separate, change it, and so forth. And I got out this chief who was a manipulator for the thing. Said, "Boy, they sure are scraping the bottom of the barrel these days." Another time I was taking some refresher instruments before I went overseas. I was in California a couple of months, and then when you fly the plane, they put a cloth over your side so you can't see where you are or do any dead reckoning, which is looking at the ground or horizon. And here again, I was supposed to fly somewhere. Anyway, he said, "Kennedy, do you know where you are?" And I was an officer then. He says, we've been over Mexico for an hour and a half. So that's why I always wanted a co-pilot. And also, navigation is not easy. And all Navy pilots, most of them, of course, single aircraft do their own navigation. So that was the Stearman, and then got to mention the PBY because that was my love. I started it for half a day every day for a year, and it became part of me. And the story was it took off at 90, flew at 90, landed at 90. It was not much speed, but it served a good purpose. And we practiced landings all afternoon, all morning.
PBY standing for?
Sir?
PBY stands for?
Patrol Bomber, something Y, I guess, I don't know. Anyway, the first they used it for they did some bombing of some submarines during the war, and mostly for scouting. I think they sighted the Jap fleet at Midway, and also one of them was the Britishman found the Bismarck. But it was mostly observation. They could stay out for half a day without enough gasoline.
Did you have one plane that was yours?
No.
So you just rotated whichever plane was available?
So you take a new one out every day, whichever one.
With a different crew?
Yeah, different crew. I suppose when you went overseas, well, we didn't. Maybe they did with smaller squadrons, and we didn't. I think fighter pilots, for instance, probably had the same crew when they came back that looked after it, and same thing on the carrier, but about the engine, I don't think so.
What do you remember of your commanders, the people over you when you were overseas?
Well, with one or two exceptions, the Navy, like goodness, they weed out the weak, and you don't find many high-ranking officers or any that didn't earn it. There was no way to get it. To be a flyer anyway, you had to go through the program. There were some 90-day wonders that we call them. If you had a degree, then but they weren't flyers, although a few had some flight training and got it without the wings. But very few. No, most of them high class and qualified. That's true in most businesses. You don't find many presidents of corporations. Well, some recently I got these used for.
After the PBYs, you flew what?
Well, in the DC-3, we called R4D or R5C, the Curtis Commander, and those two were the transport planes.
How big was the crew?
Crew, 3 or 4. You had a mechanic and a radio man, and if you were going on a very long hop, you had a navigator.
And they were good planes and easy to fly, or?
Yes. Easy to fly, you say?
Yes, sir. I mean, they were responsive and.
Oh, yes. When the war was over, we had a joke. They made some of the if you had so many points, you got to go home. If you had so many children, we joked about them having made all these medics in the hospital, made them into mechanics because we didn't have much faith in what they were doing. They weren't qualified. All qualified guys went home.
Did you do any flying once you returned to the States?
No, it was expensive, and it took time, and I was never that crazy about it. I mean, I enjoyed it, and but it's not cheap.
Right.
And I don't believe that we can fly so much you forget, and weather, you take chances on the weather, and you have to, still a serious business to fly. Like this young Kennedy, he had no business in a fairly unfamiliar airplane, fast, hot airplane, and very little time in it, and then he went into and took off in bad weather, and he didn't know anything about instruments, and he didn't know where he was, because you get, what do you call it?
Turned upside down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't know where you are, and you have to, huh?
Disoriented.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Disoriented.
No, there's another word for it. You get, but anyway, you have to believe your instruments, and if you don't do it, you get in trouble.
And it sounds like you got good training, though.
Maybe in Army, the Navy gave good training. I can't speak for the Army. I'm sure they did. Now, that was one thing the high ranks decided they weren't going to send any people to, I think World War I, they lost a lot of people, ground forces, and I don't know about flying then because there wasn't much to it, but they wanted to send trained people into battle, and I think it was proven to be a wise move.
When you were overseas, other than letters from family, how did you learn about what was going on?
Well, mostly the radio and the Yank magazine was, Army magazine was, we didn't know a whole lot. They had, I've given y'all, by the way, Time magazine and Newsweek, a reduced copy. It had no ads in it, and it's a victory issue of Time magazine, and I gave it a copy.
How often would the magazines come?
That was scarce. I didn't see but half a dozen magazines the whole time I was over there. We went to this, we were the war getting over, so we'd go home like all soldiers, sailors.
If you were going to summarize your war experiences in a few sentences, what would you say about it?
My war experiences. Well, for the most part, it was an exciting time, and people were interesting to know, and it was a good experience for me. I'm sure it matured, helped my getting through the wild age, and got me down to earth. And of my experiences, I was fortunate not to have been a combat soldier, and it was very pleasant for the most part. Very exciting, however.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think I've covered it all. Not much to it. My pleasure.
Well, we really appreciate you coming in and sharing, and your son being here with you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you.